This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard it read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let us introduce you to our panel of experts. They include Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, former House Speaker Joe Mavretic, former Secretary of State and former Attorney General Rufus Edmisten, and syndicated columnist and author John Hood. Well, this week on NC Spin, we can see the end of the 2016 elections. We'll talk about UNC President Margaret Spelling's declaration that higher education is a new civil right, and we'll discuss the 20th anniversary of charter schools in our state. Plus, as always, we're going to ask our panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's get started. The end is in sight for the 2016 elections. In 8 days, the election will be held. But thousands of North Carolinians have already cast their ballots, either by absentee or early voting. Meanwhile, we've seen so much of the presidential candidates, they might have to declare residency in our state. The Senate race is tight, the governor's race is tightened up, and we want our panelists to give you their take on that final stretch. Rufus, you've been involved in many statewide election contests. Can you remember one in which there were so many really close races coming down to the wire? Is it because we have good candidates, because of the influence of the presidential contest, or some other explanation?
First of all, Tom, I'm trying to remember how many times I ran, and I counted up the other day, and it was 10 times the primaries and all, and I've never seen anything to beat this in my life. I don't think I ever will. You have a campaign for the presidency with the two most unpopular people ever to run on major party tickets. You have a new form of campaigning that is the worst sort of appeal to the instincts that your mother would give you a spanking for and wipe your mouth out. And you also have in North Carolina, though, a changed state. This state has changed. We're not like we were in '74 when I first ran, when Joe ran. We're not that way anymore. We have a new influx of people. It is going to tighten up tremendously. Always in years past, when you had a strong national ticket, you could get by with saying about anything you wanted to. And now with the new advent of all the technology and with Citizens United, we have a zoo, a circus.
Joe, 38,000 people cast their ballots in early voting in the first 4 days. Do you think this is 9% more than what we saw in 2012? Is it a result of folks just being weary over this election and ready to vote and be done with it?
I think so. I think the people who have made up their minds much earlier than 2 months ago, people who made up their mind 6 months ago, maybe even a year ago, have voted. They want to get it over with. They don't want to have to worry about fighting any kind of a line that might be there on Election Day. And I'm not so sure the Election Day lines are going to be nearly as long because of early voting.
You may be right. Trump continues, John, to say that this election is rigged, that the polls are rigged. Almost everything is rigged as far as he's concerned, and he claims that he's winning. Is it possible that the polls are that far wrong?
No. But I mean, Trump can say all sorts of things, as we've discovered, and Hillary Clinton too. I would have to disagree a little bit on the trends so far. Early voting, I think, is a little lower than it was in 2012.
Statistics show it's 9% up the first 4 days.
We've had more than 4 days,
yeah.
and it really has evened out. But that may not be meaningful because there was a change in the distribution of early voting sites. I'd wait a little bit longer to draw a conclusion about that. But what we do know from polling and from, I think, general sense is that people are less enthusiastic this year than they were 4 years ago. This is particularly true on the Democratic side, but it's a little bit true on the Republican side, too. Of course, the Democratic side has more room to lose votes because the Republican presidential ticket is not appealing to a lot of the voters that Mitt Romney got.
Chris, last week we talked about the fact that in North Carolina, we saw a 24% increase in the Affordable Care Act premiums. Well, this past week, there was a national announcement that the premiums were going up 22%. some suspect this might hurt Hillary Clinton's campaign. Do you think it will?
Well, I don't think it helps. I think any discussion of premiums going up, whether it's in context or out of context, I don't think helps. But I think you've already mentioned, I think it was actually 475,000 people that voted in the first 4 days. So by the time early voting is over, a significant number of people have already voted. So what's fascinating about politics now is all the commercials and all the mailers that candidates are sending out and spending money on. It's a much narrower version of the electorate. And I think I should finish my first remarks by saying NC Spin is not rigged, despite what you have heard.
And that's just what Chris would say, based upon our rigging that we set up earlier.
All right.
Well, you boys cut me off when I have my best line all the time. That's rigged.
Rufus, throughout this campaign, Roy Cooper has led Pat McCrory in the gubernatorial race. But in recent days, particularly, this race has tightened up according to the pollsters. And some show that McCrory might be a point ahead or a point behind one way or the other. Is this primarily because of the governor's leadership during Hurricane Matthew?
Well, Tom, isn't it something how nature can bestow such devastation on people, and then at the same time, and let me make it very plain, I don't think Governor McCrory would one moment ever want this to happen, but then it can bestow political largesse on some people, and I think that what you're seeing is a governor in leadership role, day after day, hour after hour, and Providence has been very, very unkind to the people down east, but it's been the very lucky
Well, does this mean, Joe, that they've forgotten about HB2? Because this was a big issue with a lot
Tom,
of voters.
let me shift that a little bit. If the Ds, the solid Ds, have cast their vote, and if the solid Rs have cast their vote, then what the election day is going to come down to is independents who haven't made up their mind yet. And those numbers for or against McCrory may go out the window.
Well, we're told it's only like 6% of the voters who who remain undecided.
I understand.
We've got the same situation, John, in the U.S. Senate race. Has Richard Burr adequately made his case to the people of North Carolina? I mean, why is this race so close? This man's been in Washington 30 years.
He has. He is simply a low profile, whatever you think of him, he's a low profile member. He doesn't have strong support or strong opposition. He hasn't had in any of his races. So far, Richard Burr appears to be maintaining his consistent, relatively small lead. Some of the polls had him up close to 50%. Others had him close to the low 40s. I think that the polls all over the place reflect the fact that pollsters do not really know how to model this electorate, because we went through 2008 and 2012 where we had significant changes in the makeup of the electorate in North Carolina. To model your turnout expectations on the basis of those years is perilous. And I think pollsters are trying to figure out how to get their samples right.
Hey, Chris,
Well, I was going to say, I also think one of the key things, I think, in the Burr race, and less so, but still in the McCrory-Cooper race, is I do think Hillary Clinton's going to win North Carolina. If it's by 1 or 2, then I think those races may go down to the wire, or Republicans may win one. If Hillary Clinton wins by 4 or 5, I think it becomes very difficult, especially for Burr, but even a little more difficult for McCrory.
Well, the other thing that we've been paying a lot of close attention to are the legislative races in North Carolina, because the Democrats are trying to eliminate the supermajority, the veto-proof majority, especially in the House. As things come down to these final days, don't have but just a few seconds, yes or no, do you think that's still a likelihood, John?
A likelihood the Democrats will break the supermajorities?
Yes.
I think perhaps in the House. I don't think so in the Senate.
Joe?
I think the House is the place that it could happen.
Chris?
I think it definitely will happen in the House, and if Hillary does win significantly, I think they'll come close, but not do it in the Senate.
5 House members, 1 Senate seat.
And is this primarily going to come from the metropolitan areas of Mecklenburg and Wake?
Mecklenburg, Wake, and
The MSAs.
The Democrats have opportunities in Mecklenburg and Wake. The Republicans have some opportunities in rural areas. We'll see what the net effect is.
All right. Well, we thank you for watching NC Spin on the air or on YouTube. And by the way, there's a new way you can watch us on WRAL.com on Sunday mornings after our show airs. You can watch ncspin.com or ncspin on Facebook. You'll get video footage not seen anywhere else, perspective pieces from our panel, and our weekly column. Get more balanced debate for the Old North State on ncspin.com, ncspin on Facebook, or on Twitter @ncspintweets. When we come back, we're going to ask, is higher education a new civil right?
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Vote. This single word is vital to the future of our nation. In the coming weeks, you will have the opportunity to cast your vote. It's your chance to shape the future of your community, state, and country. It's your chance to make your voice heard. I'm asking you as a fellow North Carolinian to encourage every family member, friend, and neighbor to cast their vote. On Tuesday, November the 8th, be a part of our future and go vote.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
You sign up, you ship out, you serve, deployments get longer, families stretch thinner, all for our freedom. Obama doesn't get it. Hillary's even worse. They pretend we're not at war, put you in harm's way, and forget about you when you get home. It's a disgrace. My most sacred responsibility is to make sure we keep our promise. Let's restore the strength of our military and free veterans from a failed VA. Go to any doctor you want. You've earned it. I'm Richard Hudson, and I approve this message.
We now return to NC Spin.
Margaret Spellings, newly installed as the president of the University of North Carolina system, recently wrote an op-ed piece in the Greensboro News and Record saying that when our state decided to create the first public university in 1776, it was a revolutionary and daunting ideal. She posed a 21st century question asking, what if all North Carolinians reached their full potential? Acknowledging that this must include higher education, Spellings stated that higher education is a new civil right. John, comment on President Spellings' declaration. Is education a new civil right?
Well, elementary and secondary education is absolutely a civil right in North Carolina if we define civil right properly, which is a right that is not natural and endemic to being a human being, but a right that is created by a Constitution. In North Carolina, the North Carolina Constitution clearly, as interpreted in the recent court cases, provides an opportunity for a sound basic education for all children. But that's elementary and secondary education. I think that Margaret Spellings, she has her heart in the right place. I certainly believe that we should have great dreams and aspirations for our young people, but treating higher education, particularly colleges and universities, as equivalent to public schools and you have a civil right to attend, I think that is the wrong model.
What's your take on it, Chris?
Well, I'd go back to the Constitution of North Carolina. Higher education shall be provided to citizens as free as practicable. That sounds pretty close to a civil right. If it's in the Constitution, that shall be provided. And the question is, how much are we going to be able to pay for it? And how much are the citizens are going to be able to pay for it? So given that almost every occupation requires some secondary education, it doesn't mean a college degree, but it needs some post-high school education these days, I applaud Ms. Spellings for her statement.
Well, she certainly was trying to paint a bold new vision.
Let me pick up on something that Chris said. First of all, let's not forget that Ms. Spellings is a political animal. And she knows that she's got serious problems within the university's 16 universities, within the system's 16 universities. So we've got raw meat out here that deflects from a real problem with the system. And that real problem is that at least half of those 16 universities rank in the bottom half of colleges and universities in the United States. So before we have this big dialogue that takes over all the cameras and all the rhetoric, we really ought to ask her.
Well, she spoke to that in her op-ed
Yeah,
piece.
but the civil right thing, that's the red herring.
Rufus, she laid out in this op-ed piece that we needed to raise our expectations, that too many are limited by geography, by income, by struggling K through 12 public schools, or tuition that's out of reach. So let's start with geography. The Leando verdict basically said that low-wealth schools, mostly in rural areas, weren't getting that sound basic education John talked about. Have we significantly improved that since the court verdict?
You know, Tom, we've been trying to do that ever since I've been a grown person. I came from rural county, Watauga County, was very blessed because I had a lot of people behind me. But it's sort of a pipe dream when you say, like she says, that you are having a constitutional right to have a college education. Well, on the other hand, we're drilling into people that you've got to get a skill. You've got to do STEM all around every school, including
But doesn't that include higher education? I mean, maybe not a college, four-year college undergraduate degree.
I congratulate her, and I think that's just fine, but we need to get realistic here. The big problem about higher education today is what it costs. That's an abomination. And until you get a handle on that, fewer and fewer people are going to afford to be able to afford to go. And these easy loans that they put out on people are some of the most enticing things, and they never think they'll pay them back.
Chris, one of the things that she said was that her job as president of the university system was to help define student success, and for those in higher education then to become accountable for helping students meet their success. It sounds like she's calling to me for a reform of the university system. Is that the way you read it?
Well, I think it depends on how we're going to, I mean, yes, and then the question is, how do you measure accountability? Do you measure it on how well kids do when they graduate? Do you measure it by graduation rates? Do you measure it by the budget? Do you by how many kids get a higher education? By how many low-income kids go? So the devil's always in the details.
Very quickly, I got 30 seconds left in this segment. Tell me what your takeaway is from President Spelling's piece, John.
You got at the main point, which is not about the civil rights language, again, aspirational. The real point was about accountability for results. That's something that she's absolutely right about, and she will get a lot of pushback
Rufus?
on.
Mine is affordability. That's the whole question.
Affordability. Joe?
I just think she's deflecting away from real problems in the system.
All right, Chris?
Well, I hope it's about access. I was encouraged by her statements about that, and you mentioned the challenges of geography and poverty. I think that's one of the big takeaways.
All right, after these messages, 30 years of charter schools.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Helping people. It's all in a day's work for Wayne Goodwin. As Commissioner of Insurance, Wayne Goodwin's been a tireless advocate for North Carolina families, helping more than 100,000 seniors enroll in the Medicare drug plan while protecting them from insurance scams. And Wayne Goodwin has been fighting big insurance companies' proposals to raise rates for car, home, and health insurance. Wayne Goodwin, more than a public servant, a true friend for consumers.
You sign up, you ship out, you serve. Deployments get longer, families stretch thinner, all for our freedom. Obama doesn't get it. Hillary's even worse. They pretend we're not at war, put you in harm's way, and forget about you when you get home. It's a disgrace. My most sacred responsibility is to make sure we keep our promise. Let's restore the strength of our military and free veterans from a failed VA. Go to any doctor you want. You've earned it. I'm Richard Hudson, and I approve this message.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
In 1996, North Carolina joined other states in authorizing charter schools, institutions receiving public money but without control by local school boards. The goal was to provide excellence in education without many of the strings traditional public schools faced. Over the past 20 years, we've seen the number of charters grow and have been witness to some successes and some failures. Critics say charters take money away from and are less racially diverse than public schools. Supporters say these schools are able to innovate typically have smaller classes, fewer discipline problems, and that their success record is generally as good as or better than public schools. But the National NAACP recently passed a resolution urging a moratorium on charters. Joe, when you were in the legislature, in fact, you left the legislature before this was actually authorized, but it was debated for many years. On this 20th anniversary of charter schools, what's your assessment how well they're doing?
Well, I think they're doing very well. Remember that the statutory goal was to improve student outcomes. Last year we had 150 charter schools. This year we have 167 serving over 100,000 students. However, for the first time, the EOG tests for charter schools were aggregated and compared to the EOG test for public schools. There were 13 measures included in those measures, and of those 13, 12 of them, charter schools exceeded public schools. This is grades 3 through 8. Only on one was there close, and the public schools won by 0.5%. So I don't think there's any question that the charter schools have done in the growth over the 20 years exactly what the statute's intended.
Rufus, this all came out of the school choice movement. If you remember, there was lots of discussion basically about giving kids vouchers to go to the schools of their choice. And charters sort of evolved from that discussions. So how are we doing regarding school choice in North Carolina? We now have vouchers for low-income students. How has this movement affected public schools?
Well, you've got some people on one hand that do not think you ought to have one charter school or one voucher, and I'm that way on vouchers. However, there is something that bothers me more than that: the corporatization of the charter school movement.
Chris has talked about that for years.
Yes, corporate America is running most of them, Joe, and maybe that's okay, but I don't think that's what education is all about. And you see a disparity in pay for teachers in a lot of them. And there are, on the other hand, some people that would love to never see another public school done.
Well, Chris, one of the things that you've talked about through the years about charter schools is that ultimately, if school choice becomes a movement, your concern is that traditional public schools will be left with a lot of socially, economically disadvantaged and minority students, whereas all the other students are going to schools of choice.
Well, that's right. That's one of their concerns. And I think that, there are really good charter schools. There are really bad charter schools. My concern is there's not nearly enough accountability measures in place in charter schools. I do have a concern that we've gone so far, and I've mentioned this on the show many times, we have unaccountable virtual charter schools run by out-of-state for-profit companies who do miserably, and I'm not sure we're going to be able to get a handle on that. I do think charter schools are self-selected by parents who are very involved in their child's education, and that's what you're sort of getting to. If parents aren't really actively involved every day and don't choose the right charter school, they stay in the traditional public schools. I'm concerned that charter schools aren't required to have free lunch and transportation, which means a lot of poor kids can't go. And I would actually dispute the figures. When you look at the racial and economic breakdown of all these schools, the data is mixed at best. And one last point is really important. When they were created, they were described as laboratories of innovation, which are supposed to be transferred to traditional public schools. I haven't seen a lot of that.
Yeah. John, closing thought. Comment on this suggestion, the resolution of the NAACP calling for a moratorium on charter schools.
I think it was entirely contrary to the interests of the members of the NAACP. I think it's a good example of political influence over an organization rather than the organization following its mission, in my opinion. Charter schools are part of a movement of accountability and competition and choice in education that has been an unalloyed good for North Carolina.
All right, after these messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
It's a fact, patients who receive care in the medical home from a trusted family physician reduce healthcare costs through prevention, early detection, and affordable management of high-cost chronic diseases.
Every dollar invested in healthcare matters. Let's invest them wisely, building on North Carolina's medical home model. Better health begins with a medical home, a trusted family physician, the best return on our healthcare investment. Learn about the importance of medical homes at ournchealthcare.com.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
We now return to NC Spin.
Now we come to a great part of the show when we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. John Hood, I'm going to start with you.
Tom, two of our most prolific polling units in North Carolina, the public policy polling on the left and national research that does work for Civitas Institute on the right, do lots of polls. They both polled a bunch of the statewide races. Generally speaking, the PPP numbers showed the Democrats ahead. The Republicans did better in the Civitas numbers. But here's the exception. Dan Forrest was ahead of Linda Coleman in the lieutenant governor's race in both polls. I found that remarkable.
Interesting. Rufus, tell us something we don't know.
My friend, Congressman Walter Jones Jr. may be responsible for bringing to a head this awful thing called the super PACs. He and another member of Congress, the Democrat, and Walter's he's a good guy to go, whoever he thinks is right, have brought a lawsuit against the Federal Election Commission, and it's challenging this horrible, horrible thing called Citizens United, and I hope he wins.
All right, Joe, tell us something we don't know.
Jobs for Life is a faith-based program that teaches people how to get and keep a job. It started in North Carolina. It's gone international. And if I was a politician, active politician today, I'd see if I could get Jobs for Life in the North Carolina prison system.
Interesting. Chris, tell us something we don't know.
I found out something interesting this past week. HB2 has cost Wake County money, North Carolina money. We don't need it. We have laws on the books that'll protect people in bathrooms, even if the Charlotte ordinance is in place. And you know where I found that out? An ad paid for by the North Carolina Republican Party on behalf of Republican Representative Chris Malone, who now says we need to repeal HB2. It's killing Wake County. It's killing North Carolina. We don't need it. And the North Carolina Republican Party paid for the ad, which makes you wonder what Dallas Woodhouse is thinking.
Exactly. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State, coming down to the wire in the elections. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.